Jason. Good morning, folks. Good afternoon, folks. Good evening, folks, whatever it is. It's 5 o'clock is evening. Welcome to the Miller Center. We've got an exciting event tonight. Jim Lehrer's here, which is always a good time. Real quick, if you've got a rectangular device that looks like this, could you please turn it off, put it in vibrate mode, or somehow make it not go off and make noise? That's all we really care about. I think that's it. Without further ado, we're going to get started. So give us another 2 minutes and we're going to get going. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to run the video from here. Bill's going to stay seated. Rob, where's that other lav mic? I'm just going to go ahead and... Do you care? Kind of switch them up like this? So he's not moving, so I was thinking about putting him back onto a wired lav so we could... Does that work for you? Is the one that's just sitting back there? It's already... Yep. Yep. Hold on, Rob, if you want to dial it. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Check 1 2 3 4. Check 1 2. Good. Yes. So you got, someone's got lights, right? I'm my normal seat, so I'm just going to be sort of... Since we've got, yep, you're here. You got Jim in the middle.
Well, that's no fair.
You're the star. We only have one micer here because the other micers have the flu, so we figured you would want just me. Rob didn't think you all wanted germs today.
Well, while Mike is miking, Jim and Barbara, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here. What a terrific crowd, and there's a great overflow outside. And we're delighted to have with us today, first, Barbara Perry, the head of presidential studies, who is sort of scholar-in-chief around here. And boy, are we lucky to have her and have her play this role. The series that we're about to launch today is something that Barbara and her colleagues at the center have been working on for some time. But before going into that, I also want to introduce our special guest who needs no introduction. He is a player coach around here. Let me focus on the coach for a bit. Jim, as many of you know, is on our governing council where he regularly coaches the management team. But tomorrow, Jim, in this room, is going to be working with our scholars on how to be an event moderator. Which is not something that we have done a lot of before, and we have really never done it with somebody of Jim's caliber. In fact, there's nobody of Jim's caliber, so we're really, really delighted to have Jim with us.
Thank you.
It's great to have Jim and Kate. I know Kate's in here someplace, but I don't see her right away. Oh, there she's in the back.
There she is.
She's where I usually sit. Kate, great to have you with us. What we're launching today, we call Presidency at a Crossroads. This is a comprehensive research agenda that builds on our core assets at the center. And our core assets are Barbara and her team of scholars. Many of you know the oral histories that Barbara is the co-chair of, along with Russell Riley, that we've done for every presidency since Jimmy Carter. You've seen the black and white photo of the Ford administration, where we did a 2-day oral history conference that got us started on this. Since then, we've worked with the presidential libraries of Presidents Carter, Bush, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, and hopefully soon Obama. Also on Barbara's team are the Presidential Recordings Program. You know about their work. It was recently featured in the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam. It's been featured in documentaries and feature films on the Nixon and Kennedy administrations, for which they are expert. But there is also a set of scholars across the university who have affiliations with us, people like Mel Leffler in the back of the room, who's the Stettinius Professor of History in the History Department, but is also a Compton Professor here at the Miller Center. His colleague Will Hitchcock. Bob Bruner, who for 10 years was the Dean at Darden, is also a senior fellow with us at the Miller Center. Sai Prakash at the law school. So we draw from all parts of the university in our presidential scholarship. And what we wanted to do was start a series of undertakings that builds on the way that we all work together, first as scholars, but then also with a network of practitioners that we used in our first year project for the last 3 years, and start thinking about bigger structural questions facing the presidency. So with that, I'm going to show you a short video narrated by one of our other player coaches, see if you can name who that is, and then we'll go right into a description of what this project is.
The American presidency stands at a crossroads. Presidents must lead a diverse nation, navigate a partisan landscape, work with a divided Congress.
I'll be happy to, but you need to make sure the entire record's right. And that's exactly what I want to do. Well, then go ahead. I'm about to tell you.
Manage world tensions, communicate through new and traditional media,
To anger people like you. Okay.
and unify a nation divided. Fortunately, Americans do not have just one president. We have had 45 administrations to learn from, each with a record of victories and defeats.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
From this one office come critical decisions that affect countless lives around the world. And shape the course of history.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
For more than 40 years, the University of Virginia's Miller Center has focused on the serious responsibilities of the presidency. Based at a university founded by Presidents Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, we connect the lessons of history to today's leadership challenges. Now we are embarking on an ambitious research agenda to study the modern presidency, from constitutional powers to policy challenges, to how the office represents the American people. How can 21st century presidents lead a system designed almost 250 years ago? How does a president decide when to go to war, administer justice, or take our economy forward? How can a president bring together a country often divided by region, race, and religion? We publish books, essays, and policy papers. We sponsor conferences and seminars and produce videos and documentaries. We use traditional and new media, and we speak directly to policymakers. Our experts in politics, law, history, and business work together with an unmatched network of former White House officials from both parties, and we engage with concerned citizens from across the country to lead our democracy forward. Together we frame and influence public debate through discovery and dialogue, not dogma or discord. We reveal what really happened behind closed doors in the presidencies of John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Richard Nixon through our curation and analysis of the secret White House tapes.
I want to implement it on a feverish basis. Get those files. Close, safe, get it.
And our comprehensive oral histories for Presidents Carter, Reagan, Bush 41, Clinton, and Bush 43 capture critical memories and uncover new perspectives on historic events.
One of the real problems you have with any new administration, even one as experienced as ours was, we weren't a bunch of amateurs who'd been around there before.
The Miller Center brings the lessons of history to life and connects the past to the future.
So what we're setting out to do across three big areas is to examine the presidency at a crossroads. What do we mean by presidency and crossroads? By presidency, we certainly mean the president. This unique one office in our federal government has enormous power over the lives of American citizens and people around the world. But we mean something beyond just the president. The president is the head of the executive branch, and the presidency and the choices facing any presidency are shaped by a number of people. Presidencies have lives of their own, and they have memories of their own, and we're going to try to capture those forward. By crossroads, we are emphasizing choice, but structured choices, just like roads and the roads that cross them make clear pathways for people to choose to turn right, to turn left, to go straight, sometimes to make a U-turn. We're going to look at major decisions that are often structured for presidents. Sometimes presidents go off-road. They choose to ignore a normal turn in the road and try to set out a new pathway. Sometimes that succeeds, sometimes it fails. We'll look at those things. And we're going to do this across these three broad areas: presidency and the Constitution, presidency and policy, presidency and the American people. In each stream of activity over the next 3 years, you'll see a stream of essays, a stream of books, framed around these big questions. So what I'd like to do now is turn to our panelists and talk through what some of this could look and feel like. So Barbara, as an expert on the Supreme Court and the presidency, what are some of the big questions that you and your scholar colleagues have in mind on presidency and the Constitution?
Right. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. Jim and I, as we came in, said, this must be what everyone does the day after the Super Bowl. They come out in the afternoon, even though it's chilly, and we have civil conversation about the lessons of presidential history.
Why Brady couldn't catch that or throw that or whatever.
Right. So one of the questions that you heard in this first category of the presidency and the Constitution is one that is near and dear to my heart, because I do study both the presidency and the Supreme Court, and because I study the Supreme Court, studied the Constitution as a political scientist. And that question is, how in the world can a president today, in 2018, govern a country that is governed by a constitution that was written in 1787 and that has been amended very little since that time? Now, the good news is we have a really old constitution. The bad news is we have a really old constitution. So how do presidents deal with the issues of today in this very old system, and sometimes creaky system, and sometimes a system that perhaps doesn't work as well as we would like? Another question that I always love to pose to students, and that our scholars will be addressing as well, is this question of this Constitution which created, this is a great benefit of it, and a great strength of it, because we don't have a parliamentary system where we take our head of government out of a parliament. So a parliamentarian who leads his or her party, and then because he or she leads a majority party, becomes the prime minister and the head of government, or the head of the what we would call executive branch. Instead, our founders, always afraid of having power concentrated, separated those powers and created these three branches of government. In addition to that, in most of those countries where they have a parliament and they have a head of the government, we call it a prime minister usually, then they usually have a separate head of state who does the ceremonial work. That might be someone called a president, or it might be, as in England, if you're all watching The Crown or Victoria, it's the monarch. who does the ceremonial work. And my favorite story of that was when I taught at Sweet Bar College, I had a student whose sister sold the most Girl Scout cookies in all of the United States one year, as she set up a bank of Girl Scout cookies at the top of a metro station at the Smithsonian on the mall. And she sold the most Girl Scout cookies of any Girl Scout in the country. And she was literally brought to the White House to meet Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan took care of those ceremonial duties as well as the duties of head of government. So how does that work? What kind of traits do you need in a president who not only has to lead the government, but also has to provide that ceremonial leadership, not only greet the Girl Scout cookie Queen of the year, but also has to think about what happened in Charlottesville in August. And we look to that person to provide comfort in times of crisis. And finally, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the system that we have? So one thing I want to turn to Jim and ask, he has shared with us over the years a number of stories that he was witness to history. He was witness to presidents at the Crossroads, literally starting on November 22nd, 1963, when he was at Love Field in Dallas that day, that fateful day, and carrying on through current times. But Jim has also found himself in the midst of history. He's found himself at the crossroads with the president, and he sometimes found himself maybe even creating those crossroads, whether he knew it or not. So I want to turn to Jim and ask about one of those presidents that he certainly covered and had a very faithful conversation with, and that is Bill Clinton. And can you tell us, Jim, about the conversation that you had with Bill Clinton in the midst of the Monica Lewinsky situation?
Yes, I can do that. It's an embarrassing story for then President Clinton, and also an embarrassing story for me. But that's neither here nor there. I didn't even.
We don't see it that way for you.
Yeah, right.
But carry on.
But it definitely meets the criteria of a presidency and a president at a crossroads. The day the Monica Lewinsky story broke, his first interview on that day, I had with him. It was a previously scheduled interview about, it was supposed to be a kind of a preview interview about the State of the Union, which was about 10 days away. And on that morning, the paper, the Washington Post came, and I'd been preparing to ask questions about the economy and Bosnia and all these other wonderful things with to talk to President Clinton about. Anyhow, the big headline in the Washington Post was a president accused of having an improper relationship or an affair with 21-year-old intern. And the issue was whether or not the president was going to make a statement. He didn't make a statement all day. Whether or not he was going to go ahead and do the interview. It was scheduled for late in the afternoon. Anyhow, to get to the point, to my surprise, the president went ahead with the interview. And up to that point, it was about 3 in the afternoon. He still had not made a statement. In other words, he hadn't said, yes, I did do this awful thing, or no, I didn't, it's outrageous. He hadn't said anything until the interview began. And I felt that what he said was, I will skim over the embarrassing part about me. I asked him, Mr. President, fabulous question, Mr. President, the Washington Post and by then the Los Angeles Times reported that you had an improper relationship with a 21-year-old intern, and he said, quote, "There is no improper relationship." And I followed up, and he kept saying the same thing, more or less the same thing, and for about 7 or 8 minutes. And I realized that he wasn't going to go anymore, so we went on to Bosnia. And realizing that I'm going to come back to it before the interview is over. Anyhow, the long and short of it is, the president spoke in the present tense. All of my questions were in the past tense, and I was either too nervous or too occupied or whatever. I didn't pick up on the fact that he was speaking in the present tense. I just saw it as a denial, and it was only after I got back to the office and actually talked to Kate called Kate expecting to have praise for my interview and all this sort of stuff. And she praised me. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. But then she said, well, we have 3 daughters. And one of the daughters had called and said, Dad, he was speaking in the present tense and you were speaking in the past tense. And I felt like, deservedly so, felt like an idiot, felt like a fool. But by the end, I got away with it because I thought my career was over. But I got away with it because later in the day he did update it and put it in the past tense. But why this is the Crossroads was because it truly affected his presidency. It, of course, led to his impeachment. Of course, he wasn't removed, he wasn't convicted, he wasn't removed of office, but he lost his power, huge hunks of his power as the president to shape and to form, as well as to validate or change. I mean, he was a damaged president, and as we have seen, why it's so critical now, even the legacy from that interview. Because he then said, at first he kept saying this, but it was first in that interview where he used that there is no, and that became very famous and all this sort of stuff. He essentially lied, let's face it, he lied. And people were not used to, but if he hadn't lied, this is why, it's a long answer, I'm sorry about this, but the bottom line is, let's say he had told the truth. Let's say he'd said, Jim, you're absolutely right. The Washington Post is right. The Los Angeles Times is right. I did have an improper relationship with an intern. And by the way, I resigned. He would have to have said that. I mean, he couldn't have admitted it and then say, oh, by the way, let's talk Bosnia. So he had decided that he was not going to go. And at least that was decision number one. And then there was a lot of confusion and a lot of, in time, he worked out his strategy clearly was if I can get through these first few days, first few hours, first few days, then few weeks, and maybe I can survive as president of the United States. And he went as far down that road as you can go. I mean, let's face it, impeachment is there's no further route to go. And he did it because he decided that he was going to do everything he could to survive. And it's an interesting thing because now what he did is now being used in the Me Too movement and the sexual harassment issue that's become such a huge thing. And Bill Clinton is considered now as a principal person of history in that issue. And the President of the United States. Now we have a President of the United States who is also accused of sexual harassment. He's also denying it. And in a different environment altogether, it's fascinating how it's played out, and it's still playing out, of course.
Absolutely.
Sorry about the long
answer.
answer.
No, perfect.
I'm learning in my moderation, even before the coaching, that when you're on a roll, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah. But I'm going to tell the folks tomorrow that if somebody goes on and on and on, interrupt.
But to that very story, Jim, that was personal to me because that was the first day of my second year working at the White House, and the first year was a dream because the economy was booming. The president was in command. He had great relations with Congress. He had just been reelected. Didn't quite get to 50%, but was on a roll. And our lives changed dramatically that day because, to what you were saying, he lost his power. It was just hard to get things done after that.
Was it difficult for you to go to work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Because you knew that whatever you were working on, having been there for a year before that, if you were working on a subject, your ability to dominate the national conversation is what makes the president so important, right? It's the power to persuade, as Dick Neustadt said. And we lost that power in the second year. So you knew every day going into the office, setting aside the fact that you had questions about the moral standing of the president and whether or not he violated or obstructed justice, your job wasn't fun because it was just so much harder to get things done because you didn't have the ability to persuade in the media. Everything had to be done quietly.
So our next topic is going to be presidency and policy. That'll be the second in our Crossroads agenda. And you can see even from just this discussion how you can cross over all three of our categories of president and the Constitution and policy and the people. Because just on this Bill Clinton conversation alone, you have the constitutional issue of impeachment. You have the policies Bill was working on and saying it gets really hard to try to present the president's policies and hard for the president to present his policies when his moral authority is being questioned, as it was. So back to our story about presidential leadership as the head of government and as the ceremonial leader of the country. But it also involves the people because, fascinatingly enough, the more Bill Clinton was attacked by Ken Starr, the special prosecutor, in that case, and the Republicans in Congress, the higher his approval rating went among the public, as did Hillary Clinton, the First Lady.
So let me bring it back, Barbara, to president and policy. Give us a sense of the big kind of policy questions that you all are thinking about, where the president sits in this constitutional system, but has an enormous ability to shape policy, both in working with Congress, but also acting unilaterally. What are some of the questions you and the team are all getting into?
Obviously, we can divide policy into foreign policy and domestic policy, but my brilliant colleagues, Guillen McKee and Mark Silverstone, two historians, have decided to link those because so often they are linked. This is not an artificial linkage of domestic policy and foreign policy. So, for example, some of the programming that we're going to have at the Miller Center as relates to Presidency at the Crossroads this year, because it is the 50th anniversary of 1968, remember back to that year. Remember how foreign policy and domestic policy were often linked or were colliding in that presidential race of 1968. You had the incumbent President Lyndon Johnson stepping aside because he thought he might not even get the nomination of his party, or if he did, might not win the term that he could run again for. And in addition to the Vietnam crisis, the Vietnam War, we had race issues and poverty issues and gender issues and violence in the street. And literally, sadly, in that year, our political leaders being gunned down. So that concept of linking foreign policy and domestic policy will not be difficult, but it's a newer way, actually, to look at public policy that volume will focus on. One portion of that, I look back to my colleague Mel Leffler, he and our colleague Will Hitchcock are going to be taking a portion of this area and looking at presidents and war. Obviously, foreign policy, defense policy. How do presidents decide to go to war? Are they attacked into war, as in Pearl Harbor or 9/11, or do they step into war? Once they're in that war, how do they carry it out? And how do they choose if there's not an outright win, if there's not a signing of the treaty on the battleship Missouri to end World War II, or a signing in Europe to end the war in that theater? How do they decide to get out? Vietnam, perfect example, but let's say Iraq and Afghanistan more recently. So again, you can see that a topic like that is actually going to cross over these three categories. So what is the president's constitutional role in going to war? What is the statutory authority that he has? How does he carry out that foreign and defense policy in perpetrating a war? And what role do the people have? As they had a tremendous role and a determinative role in Vietnam, and sometimes in the way the Iraq War was pursued by President Bush 43. We also want to look at the economy, obviously, but domestic, but also international in this global era. How have presidents addressed the economy? What kind of role can they play? We give them all sorts of credit and discredit in the economy, but what are the facts about that? Another component that we're going to be working on as we start this year and as we start into the Obama presidency and the oral history, and thanks to Bill for working out all the details on this, because we are going to be looking at the 10th anniversary of the meltdown of the economy, and Jim has just reported to me today what the stock market is doing. So
you don't want to know if you don't.
If you don't know, hold your ears.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about that part today, but we are going to say that we're going to look back 10 years and what are the lessons that we learned from the meltdown of the financial system in 2008, and we're going to start doing that by going back to some of the interviews that we've done for the Bush 43 project, because of course Bush was going out of office as that happened, and Obama was about to win the presidency and come into office. And in this era that we bemoan polarization and lack of bipartisanship, there was tremendous bipartisanship at that time. And actually the president and the Congress working together very closely on something like TARP, which some people may still disagree that we should have gone down that road, but the view at the time was if we don't have TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, the economy is going to seize up. The financial system is that close to it was already seizing up for people to get car loans and mortgages, and for small businesses to get loans to run on an everyday basis, and then for Wall Street to operate. And if that happened, imagine the impact that that would have on the American people and globally. So another example of where we'll go forward with that. And then finally, how can the president work together with the Congress? Or if he can't, what does that mean? How do we get policy accomplished? If there is a Congress and a president of a different party, or even in the current instance when you have a president and Congress of the same party, but they can't seem to work together except on the tax bill. And then let's not forget state governments enter into this as well, and certainly in my view I care about courts. So what impact do the courts have on policy, particularly when a policy like the current travel ban gets immediately challenged at the courts and may end up as it did all the way at the Supreme Court. So I want to turn to Jim again for some of his stories and observations about presidents at war, because you followed both the Bushes, Bush 41 and Bush 43, in the same part of the world, how they perpetrated those wars in the Middle East.
I think those two wars and the way they were, the two presidents, the two Bushes handled them, are a very good lesson in contrast that is just there to study and to know. That anybody who was around for those two beginnings of those two wars knows the difference. George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, took the United States to war with a huge coalition supporting the action after the Iraqis invaded, quote, in quotes, Kuwait. But I mean, they went over the line. There was a real provocation, but they went to war with a coalition, and they also went to war. He meaning George H.W. Bush, went to war with a bottom line or an end point already well known, and just, in other words, get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. That's what it was about. It wasn't to necessarily, in fact, it wasn't at all to remove Saddam Hussein from power. It wasn't to occupy Iraq. It wasn't to change anything in Iraq. It was just to get the Iraqis back home and whatever. And and nobody, there were, not only say nobody, there were very few people who thought it would end there, because wars don't end that way anymore. But that's exactly what happened. In other words, Jim Baker, who was the Secretary of State, did what Secretary of States are supposed to do, which is put together international coalitions, and he had just about the entire world of consequence with him. But once it went so easily, there was agitation, and we reported on it. There was agitation. Well, why? As long as we're there, why not go ahead and just go to Baghdad and get rid of this guy, Saddam Hussein? And George H.W. Bush was advised by all of his advisors. I'm talking about people that he listened to, not only Jim Baker, but Brent Scowcroft and all those folks. He was the National Security Advisor, who said, no way. If we go any further than what we promised, we'll lose our coalitions, our coalition partners forever. We'll lose our credibility. Boom, end. And there were very few casualties, as you remember, and they pulled back, and that was the end of it. Now, George W. Bush, just the opposite. there was provocation, but not a provocation for a war against Iraq again. The provocation, of course, was 9/11, and the war, the military action, was justified against the Taliban and the folks in Afghanistan. But I don't have to go over all the history here, but the fact of the matter is there were people who advised George W. Bush, and he was already leaning that way apparently on his own, that we need to get rid of Saddam Hussein. We didn't do it the first time, let's do it now. Now, we did not mean the Bushes, and not even George H.W. Bush's advisors were not in favor of going after Iraq when, in fact, George W. Bush and his folks did. And they did it, as you know, on the premise that, on the grounds that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And this is also, you talk about a presidency in Crossroads. I mean, here was a situation which was a part of the, it probably began with Vietnam, but this kind of, where people began to really not trust government. This was further evidence, that you can't trust the government. Oh my God, the intelligence was wrong. He really didn't really have weapons of mass destruction. All that came out later, and it was the war was poorly handled. All of the premises, all of the kind of, not guarantees, but promises, but goals as stated at the beginning, all of them went out the window, one after another. It all became kind of a mess. And by most, even people who were huge supporters of George W. Bush would say today that this was a huge failure of George W. Bush's administration as a president. And it damaged, there's no question, damaged, that's all in the eyes of the wah-wah, but it certainly changed and impacted the role of the president in deciding when to go to war, when not to go to war, and whatever. Congress ended up voting in support of that, remember, by a huge margin. And it was a result, of course, of believing the intelligence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Anyhow, there are a lot of things that happened as a result of the decision to go to Iraq, and the way we went, and what we did when we got there. Had a lasting impact to this day on the president, and may continue for years to come.
Well, Jim, I think that's a really terrific point and a great pivot to the last question of the president and the American people. As you say, one of the great consequences of a failed war and the failed intelligence leading up into it was a loss of faith in institutions, which is really how the people connect to the presidency. So, Barbara, in that context, how do we think about that institutionally and structurally? How does a president navigate his or her, at some point soon, I hope,
yes,
for my daughter's sake,
in my lifetime, please,
and for all of our sake, that relationship with the people, representing and leading at the same time? What are some of the big questions you all are thinking about there?
Right. Well, obviously we are in a highly polarized situation now and environment. We've mentioned the lack of faith in institutions. Well, that's a constitutional problem as well. If people don't have faith in our constitutional system, in the political system, in the electoral system, we do have a problem. And Jim mentioned, and Bill did too, the loss of faith most recently. I always point to the fact that the Gallup poll started taking polls of representative samples of the American people in the early 60s, asking them this question: do you have faith in the federal government to do the right thing? In 1960, in the early 1960s, before President Kennedy's assassination, 75% of people polled would say yes, they had considerable faith in the federal government to do the right thing. By the time you get to the end of that awful period of the Kennedy assassination, 1968 and Vietnam, the King assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, and top it off with Watergate, by the time you get to 1974, only 25% of the people polled would answer that they had faith in the federal government to do the right thing. And occasionally we would spike upwards with Morning Again in America with Ronald Reagan and a feeling of goodness and health and comfort from the chief executive. We'd spike upward. 9/11, a crisis where we would all gather together, we'd spike upward. But as you can imagine, we're bumping along now at a very low rate. And of course, the faith that people have in the presidency as an institution, that the people have in Congress is usually down now in the single digits, that they have faith in that institution. The one of the three branches that tends to outshine the others in that realm is the Supreme Court. I'm happy to say, since I study them, that's not the reason, but I'm glad to say that they do. But even they have been trending downward into the 50% range or so. So what kinds of questions are we going to be asking? Well, one is, how can a president govern? How can a president lead in this time of polarization? How can a president cross over party lines? How can a president cross regional lines and religious differences and differences among races? And I would add gender into that category because, as Jim pointed out, gender is on our minds, particularly now. And then the other element of this that I think is so fascinating that our scholars, Nikki Hemmer, for example, who is a media historian here, will be looking at how media have affected the presidency. And how have presidents used media? How have media and their reporting on presidents affected presidents? Helped them to get reelected or perhaps brought them down? And I can't sit on the stage with Jim Lehrer and not ask him about presidential debates. Because, of course, he was our leader for so many years in presidential debates, in moderating presidential debates. And so I wanted to ask him particularly about one of the debates that Barack Obama had with Mitt Romney and a situation that Jim saw as a watcher, as a viewer, but also some stories that you might share with us about how you saw media having an impact on presidential elections through the debate process.
Well, I could even show you scars from that debate. That was the whole debate, presidential debate process. Remember, the first ones, the first televised debates were between Kennedy and Nixon, and then there was several years where there were none, and then they started again. There's been a ever-changing format, evolution, I should say, of the format, and it finally, in 2012, got to a point where we wanted to get, we meaning people who were interested in presidential debates, which was make them more real debates, less 1 minute, 2 minutes, and so controlled, and let the candidates talk to each other and question each other, et cetera, et cetera. And so here again, I was just the implementer as the moderator. I didn't have anything. I encouraged the opening things up, and I supported it and all of that. And in fact, I had retired from not only from the NewsHour but from doing presidential debates, and was talked back into doing this last debate because it was the first one where they were really going to open up, and that was the one between Romney and Obama. And it went exactly the way we had wanted it to go and the way I had wanted it to go, which is they really opened up. Unfortunately, we didn't really, we meaning the big we, the people who were involved in the debates, had not explained this beforehand, and people thought, oh my God, this thing is out of control. What happened to the Billy Bob moderator here? Why doesn't he tell somebody to shut up? And why is he letting them do da-da-da-da? Well, the fact of the matter is that was the way we wanted to do it. We wanted to, and so it would be more revealing, da-da-da-da. At any rate.
So it is okay to let you talk.
It is okay. It is okay. In a debate. And it also, the test I had, keep in mind, the test is that, under the most pressurized situation I've ever been in my life, the test was that they had, what they were talking about had to be relevant. Then if it wasn't, I didn't think it was relevant, then I'd move it on anyhow. But the bottom line was that when it was all said and done, it was very clear to anybody who watched it, except me, because I was from here to Gene 5, who's sitting on the back. I was that close, but I that's the worst place to watch a debate. A debate is to be seen on a television screen, and so when it was all over. And we went to dinner with our family and all this kind of stuff. I had a kind of it was very interesting. I felt good about it. We had done what we said. Well, then there were all the Twitters and the tweets and the wah-wahs and the thing, and oh my God, and the overwhelming consensus was that Barack Obama had lost the debate 2-1, and so had the moderator, And the problem was that once things got sorted out, and the moderator finally escaped conviction, but Obama did not, and because it was very clear, and it was finally reported accurately that he had decided not to prepare for the debate. Because he thought, hey, I've been president of the United States for 4 years. That's my preparation. So they couldn't get him to read any briefing papers. They couldn't get him to run any dry runs, and it showed. And he came and he lost the debate. And he lost 6 or 7 points. I don't remember how many points in the polls, but he was really in trouble after the first debate, and that got his attention. And all the people who had criticized Barack Obama, even some of the people who supported him, but criticized his kind of laid-back approach, the kind of, hey, I'm a man of grace and dignity, which is true, and I don't get my hands dirty, the kind of thing, and he had to come to grips with the fact that if he continued that way, he was going to lose this election, and it was. Quote, a crossroads, end quote.
It was a debate crossroads.
It was, sure. And it also spoke to this whole question of what we at the center are going to be talking about, over these next 3 years. That the communication, the way you communicate now, is you don't know what it's going to be tomorrow. And who'd have thought about anybody here even know there was such a thing as Twitter 5 years ago, 10 years ago? I mean, even Facebook, all this kind of stuff, all the things, who knows what the hell it's going to be 2 years from now, much less 4 years from now. And where there are all kinds of ways to communicate, get word out and all this kind of thing. And we're all caught in this kind of tsunami of new technology, which has brought on a tsunami of information, some of it distorted, some of it lies. To use a new common term. I spent a whole career in journalism never using the word lie. Now it's a common term. A lot of things have changed. A lot of things have changed in the last couple of years or so. I'd say last 18 months in particular. But the way we communicate is one of them. And then you talk about the polls. Here we have a president who has got very low, comparatively speaking, historically low approval ratings. And if we had a parliamentary system, you mentioned that earlier, he'd be gone. And but he's now more powerful. The president is now more powerful probably than any time in history. He is, for instance, you talk about your courts. Your courts are now, they're litmus tests for appointment of federal judges. Somebody did a study, and 90% of the decisions of the Supreme Court result in decisions that are in complete sync with the presidency that
appointed that
particular justice.
Yes.
Look what's going on right now, right as we speak. In addition to the Eagles having won the Super Bowl and 1,100 points in the whatever, I mean the stuff with the memo and the Russian investigation and all that. The president is in charge. He's pushing the Congress the way he wants it done. In other words, the power of the president to influence is much stronger now than it's ever been in all branches of government, not just the executive branch. Don't you agree with me?
I absolutely agree with you, and this is why we're going to be looking at the history of this, because it was not always that way in our system.
That's
and
right.
I don't think the Founding Fathers, if you look at the Constitution, Article 1 is the longest of the 3 articles that create the 3 branches, and it is the longest article. They were putting their hopes in the Congress as it would be closest to the people.
That's right. And they were to check the power of, and the courts were to check the powers of the other 2.
Absolutely.
And all 3 were to check each other.
That's right.
And now we've through a process of fact and events and evolution, we have created a very powerful presidency, a very weak Congress, and a kind of political court system. Other than that, we're in great shape.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Maybe with that, we should now turn to the audience and get your questions for Barbara and Jim.
And Bill.
And me, if I can help. There's a microphone in the back, and
I guess I'll step up since no one else will. Presidency at the Crossroads, you brought up the example of the 2 wars, First and Second Iraq War. And we're looking at these after the fact when everything's very clear. And here we are today, possibly facing North Korea, maybe deciding what to do about Iran, maybe Syria. When we're actually facing it right in our faces, it's not so obvious what to do. So how useful, what can we draw from the past that we can actually bring to bear today? It doesn't look obvious to me at all what to do.
I think that is a terrific question, and it frames why we're doing. It is hard, in particular instances, to draw historical analogies, but those are often the only things you have in a particular moment. You can assess threats, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses. But every time you are in a position of making a decision, you're also having to think, what are the after effects and the double after effects of any decision I make as a president or as a policymaker? And are there other experiences where the echo of those decisions can inform a decision today? So it's exactly that uncertainty in a moment of decision where being able to reflect on other decisions can provide value for decision makers. Barbara, do you have an example that comes to mind?
Well, 2. Mel will tell me if I'm remembering accurately, the story that Will Hitchcock tells, our colleague Will, is on March the 20th, next month, will publish the definitive biography of Eisenhower and his life and times. And I think...
I've read it. It's a terrific book.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
And so, if I'm remembering correctly, that he tells the story of Eisenhower in 1954 and Dien Bien Phu, and whether the United States should become more involved in Vietnam. And I'm thinking correctly, is this right, Mel, that Eisenhower decides not to press forward the lessons learned from the French, who of course were defeated by the North Vietnamese at Dien Bien Phu. So there's an instance right there of a president, by the way, who had, 31 years experience in the military, a 5-star general and the supreme Allied commander in World War II, certainly had the lessons, the military lessons, but also knew as president what to do or not to do. And then I'm also thinking of the Cheney comments from our oral history, where he says at the Panama invasion, and Bill tells this story so well, that Cheney says in our oral history, and he's told us this story as well, that the Panama invasion in the Bush 41 administration, you would have thought with Dick Cheney on the team and Brent Scowcroft and Colin Powell and Bush 41 himself and all the experience that he had, a golden resume, particularly in foreign affairs, that would be the A-plus team in foreign and defense affairs. But in our oral history, Dick Cheney says, but we hadn't worked together. We had not worked together as a team. And so we actually needed, he said, it would have been helpful if we had some kind of simulation exercise beforehand to show us how to work together as a team. But it does show that even the best team, even the most qualified team and the most prepared team is not even necessarily ready to make the decision on North Korea now, or something that has happened across history.
Yeah, and we saw it just to pick up on the two Bush decisions. the George W. Bush, I mean Bush number 43, had complete access to all of the advisors of George H.W. Bush, and he ignored every one of them. I mean, he chose not to go with his advisors. He used his own advisors, etc. And this is always going to be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to that point, it is fascinating. One of his most important advisors was Cheney, who, in that instance, didn't go back to the lessons of Dick Cheney from 41, which is the importance of the deputies process. Yes. And the deputies is the one that essentially as the ones who do due diligence on any action of going to war. And had there been a full deputies process, perhaps the invasion might have been done differently. One deputy dominated, but other deputies were sort of pushed aside.
Scowcroft, very much opposed to the Second War, wouldn't talk to George W. Bush. I mean, he had to write an op-ed piece, writing up his opposition to the war, and even George H.W. Bush couldn't get his son to talk to Brent Scowcroft, and that's the idiosyncrasies that go with somebody having the power of the presidency and how he or she wants to exercise it.
And by the way, Mel is currently writing a book on that process, and so we will know more when that comes out in the Bush 43 project, which our oral history project we are due to release at our Presidential Ideas Festival for May of 2019. So stand by.
This gentleman here. Oh, to the back, and then we'll bring the mic up front. No, please go ahead, and then we'll bring it up front.
Is there any such thing as the American people?
I've got an answer, but I'm as interested in hearing these two.
I think most assuredly there's an American people. And there is, yes. The answer is yes. Wholeheartedly, enthusiastically. Well, he and she are right here in this room. He and she are out there. He and she are driving on Ivy Street. He and she they're everywhere.
So your polarization is gender.
Polarization does not rule out the American people. It just means the American people are polarized, and there is no one kind of American people. There's not only one. There's not one. There are some views. Oh my God, I'm way over my head here. Literally. There used to be, let's put it this way, there used to be kind of a set of values that we all accepted, whether we were Republicans or Democrats, tall, short, brown, white, black, male, female, Christian, Greek, Christian, Jew, whatever. I'm doing that self for Antholis here. Whatever we were, there were some basic things about the reason people came to America. You know, that number one, and we all did, by the way, and we all started. I know this is not a political statement, but it's just a factual statement. We all began with immigration of some kind, and but there was a reason people came here, and those reasons still exist. The problem is that it's been many years now, and we've had many opportunities to make, in a democratic society, to make the wrong decision here and the right decision there, and a kind of a mixture here, and elect people that, we've functioned. And every once in a while, things need to be kind of restarted, reset. And I think we're in we may be in a reset period right now for what the American people are and what the American people believe. I hope, I don't know. You could go on and on about that. And I almost did.
I'll take a quick stab at that, which I think builds on what Jim said. It really is one of the reasons we framed this project in this way. There have been other moments in American history where we've gone from periods of somewhat great consensus to periods of division about what unites us as a people. And to one thing Barbara said about how Guillen and Mark Silverstone are thinking about on the policy dimension, there have been other great moments where domestic conflict have coincided with uncertainty about who we are and what we are in the world. So if you think about the progressive era in World War I, the Great Depression in World War II, civil rights in Vietnam, enormous internal churn about were we united in the domestic things we were looking at, and could we unite ourselves in addressing a great international challenge? And it feels that those debates are very much alive today, and all kinds of things fuel it, often feeling that we're not one people. One of the great books on nationalism is called Imagined Communities, and it talks about how the printing press united people because everybody read the same news and they felt they were part of the same nation. If you think about our fractured media today, we listen to different news and we think differently about national challenges. So are there ways to think in a united way at this moment of division? Those are some of the questions we'll be looking at.
I would point out, for instance, at the risk of sounding like a pundit, which I'm not. Remember 9/11. When 9/11 happened, this whole country just kind of, you talk about the American people, everybody wanted to do something. We all felt like we'd all been attacked. And unfortunately, our leadership, our institutions of leadership, not just the presidency, not just the Congress, not just this, but our institutions failed us. They didn't rise up with us and give us something to do. They didn't take what was a good instinct to get together and let's figure out what happened and who we are and all this kind of stuff. It just the moment passed, and what did we do? We went to war, and instead of using that as a device, and we failed, no question about it, to use this opportunity. But there'll be others, hopefully. Hopefully not out of a crisis like that, but.
I think we had one question up in the front here, and then maybe one after that.
Yes, you brought up an interesting point about the Congress and turning power back. And I might say breaking news. The Supreme Court refused to entertain the state of Pennsylvania's desire to redo all of the congressional districts. They said, we're not going to hear that. And it seems to me that the final sort of way of shifting too much control out of the hands of the people is the gerrymandering process. And it would seem that the Supreme Court, in this time, the individual really was very much related to be a right-winger. He said, no, we will redraw the boundaries to be more equitable in some political sense. And that seems to me a real shift back towards turning the power more back to the people, as the primary founders of the Constitution had in mind.
So you're saying that the court not taking this case, which of course it only takes about 80 at the most now, 60 to 80 a year. There's a whole book written about that called Deciding Not to Decide. And oftentimes the media will get it wrong by saying the court decided today, that terrible media, deciding, but sometimes that's what they do. They don't take a case. Lee Middleditch is here, I see.
Yeah, Lee's hand's up in the back.
Yeah, because Lee is an expert on gerrymandering and I think has the same concern, perhaps as you, about how districts are drawn. Do note that I hadn't heard this latest news about the Pennsylvania case, but do note that the court has heard an oral argument and will decide by the end of this term, which will end in June. Typically they do. The Wisconsin case involving the very meaning of gerrymandering, and if it becomes a violation of sort of equal protection of the laws by having it based on politics, which seems redundant to me. That is gerrymandering, is drawing districts based on politics. But I would argue that that's an important case, and I think that these issues that rise all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, again, they get typically 8,000 cases a year and they're only taking 60 to 80 of them, they get to decide which ones to take. But the ones that they do take, they believe they need to decide. And given that we've got this tripartite system of 3 branches of government, the founders believed that, the founders were smart enough, genius enough to know that we should have a Republican form of government, small r, not a pure democracy, not where all of us would directly have an impact on public policy. But that's why they created the Electoral College, for example. They wanted to put all sorts of checks between the people directly and those who would make decisions, like the president. And I always point out with the Electoral College, interestingly enough, the check on the people who were voting at the founding. Only people like the founders, white male property owners, and they didn't even trust them. So they created an electoral college to check them for selecting the president. But they wanted to make sure that they had that third branch, and typically we call the courts the third branch. And having not only studied them for a lifetime, but served at the Supreme Court as a fellow for a year in the mid-90s, I very much admire that branch of government. And I think that having, as part of my job there, to talk to people coming at that time from new democracies around the world, was talk about what are the American people, and people come here as immigrants. But these were leaders from, I literally had 2 judges from Outer Mongolia and 3 holy men from Turkmenistan. It sounds like a joke. 3 holy men from Turkmenistan to go into a bar. But these were people coming from the Far East, from the Middle East, from Latin America, from Central America, from the old Soviet Union that had just collapsed along with Eastern Bloc countries. And they were coming to the United States, to Washington, to say, how could we have a system like yours? And I would say, we're not perfect. This is not a perfect system. It's not a perfect constitution. The branches of government aren't perfect. The people in it aren't perfect. But I tell you what, it was the 50th anniversary of World War II, and the court mounted an exhibit of the court and World War II. And a part of that exhibit was the Japanese internment case, where the court approved 6-3 the internment of innocent Americans, half of whom were born here and were American citizens, but they happened to be Japanese. And the court had that as part of the exhibit. So I said to particularly some people we had from the old Soviet Union who were kind of anti-American, I'd say, we're not perfect, but oftentimes when we're not perfect, we at least own up to it. So go downstairs and look at that exhibit. And then they'd say, from other countries, every judge we have is corrupt. And I had people from Mexico and Latin America, they'd say, all of our judges are corrupt. So if you go to them, or someone goes to them and gets a decision, it's corrupt. And they'd say, how do you have, at least our federal judiciary particularly, it's not corrupt. I think there have been maybe 15 federal judges impeached and convicted and removed from office. So again, the system's not perfect, but what we want to study in this project is to be a more perfect union, and I would say e pluribus unum to this man here. So from many we become one.
So I see Lee Middleditch, and there was a woman up front here. Did you want to ask a question, ma'am? Here too?
She did.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, so Lee, and then this one, and then I think we said we were going to close at 6, but I think we've gone over a little bit. We can take 2 more questions.
I'm intrigued about going to war. As most of us know, Afghanistan has been the longest conflict that we've had in our history. We have armed forces in Syria, we have armed forces in Iraq, and Senator Kaine, during the Obama administration, co-authored the War Powers Act, which was to put constraints upon both the executive and the legislative branch about going to war. Why has that not had any legs in terms of the ability to portray it to the American people? Is it simply that we overlook the fact that we have soldiers in Afghanistan for such a long period of time? Why has the American public not seized on this?
Well, this is first of all, Lee, thank you for the question. And I think this is a great testament to the Miller Center. Long before I came here, Barbara, maybe I can't remember exactly what year you arrived, but the War Powers Commission that the Miller Center started in 2008, 2009, Gene? 2008 was a bipartisan, scholar-driven thing. John Jeffries was one of the leading scholars on it from our law school here, co-chaired by former Secretaries of State Warren Christopher and James Baker. Bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission issues draft legislation that Senator Tim Kaine and Senator John McCain entered into the legislative process word for word, and that came out of here at the Miller Center with a lot of people behind it, and Gene taking a leadership role as well. I don't think it made progress to the extent that I've talked to Senator Kaine about it, which I have. I think he thinks that, frankly, the problem was Congress. Congress didn't want to act on it. I think President Obama really wanted Congress to act. You'll remember that his excuse for not striking Syria after the so-called red line was crossed was that he wanted to go to Congress to get a vote on it. And essentially, Congress didn't want to have anything to do with it and wouldn't support the strike that he said he was going to do. So they ended up, negotiating to get the chemical weapons removed. But the big reason for it was that Congress itself didn't want to step up and be a fully functioning branch at that moment. And Congress hasn't wanted to step forward and require authority, partly, I think, because they fear that they will still be ignored and overruled, and it's not worth spending the political capital, if you're a member of Congress, to actually own a war. You'd rather have the president own a war, frankly, because, let the grieving family members of lost servicemen complain to the president. Don't come complaining to me. They had been burned, I think, in having supported the second Gulf War, and they felt, we'll just let the president deal on this. And so that's, I think, Lee, that's the reason why there's been no traction and action on it, at least as far as Senator Kaine is concerned.
Seems only fitting that the last question should be for you, Mr. Lehrer, and be on the subject of what it is. Should be on the subject of the media's role in politics. Now, we saw in our last election how devastating social media was because of the Russian influence, because of the number of people who didn't necessarily have the education or the knowledge to be able to be speaking the truth about what they were discussing would flood the social media. But we also saw, to be fair, and we also saw partisan cable channels on both sides, but we also saw a mainstream media that was more inclined to want to enhance its own ratings by following Mr. Trump every breath. And so every one of his rallies was seen by all of us day in and day out. And I can't really say that television has changed very much in the past year. I still watch every night and I listen to the more aggravating news about his personality disorder rather than the impact that all of his executive orders, for example, are having on our world and on our society. So it doesn't come to mind to a lot of people what's happening to the air or the water or corporate controls, that kind of thing. Instead, they think about the latest affair or this, that, or the other. So the question is, do you think, as a journalism expert, that things will change now that we can see what the media has wrought in some way, in some small way? Do you think that that will change at all in the coming elections?
That's a terrific question. No. Let me be optimistic. And I'll be the first to tell you this is based on hope as much as it is on the facts as they exist right now. But there is a glimmer of reason to have hope. Here again, no matter where you come down on the politics of what's going on now in Washington, the fact is that the mainline media, I'm talking primarily about the New York Times, the Washington Post, in some cases the Wall Street Journal, are doing a superb reporting job. There are a lot of people that don't like it, but the people who don't like it are the people who are being exposed by this good reporting. My hope is that out of this will come exactly the kinds of things you're talking about, that there will be a reestablishment of two things. First of all, an audience, a readership for this kind of quality journalism, and the second renewal, hopefully, will come in what we used to have in the good old days, 20 years ago. We had shared facts, as Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, anybody's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. But everybody's entitled to their own facts now. They think so, but the creeping through this terrible situation that has come from a good thing, which is the development of new technology and the opening up for many voices to be heard and all of that. But what has come as a result of that is this confusion out of the tsunami and all of that, and stories are out of the noise and the competitive noise, and the competitive noise is has been created by the need for people to stay alive. And by more voices, more competition, and so you have to do more weird things, they think, in order to draw attention to yourself, and run stories a little earlier than you would otherwise, be a little more personal in the reporting. In other words, do some bad journalism. But now, because things have gotten serious, boys and girls, and whether you like it or not, wherever you come down in what now confronts the country in Washington, it's a huge it's a huge thing, and everybody's paying attention to it, and everybody not paying attention necessarily. They're beginning now to pay attention, I think, because of the solid reporting that these major news organizations are doing, and those news organizations are influencing the entire media. And yes, there's the right wing media and there's the left wing media that we haven't had before, but they are being more increasingly isolated. And the need for facts in the middle by the people in the middle who care, whether you're a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, whether you're a little bit of a Republican or whatever, whether you hate Donald Trump or you love Donald Trump or you're this or that, you're a big congressional freak, whatever, you want to know what the hell happened. And you want to believe somebody when they report it, and it's coming back. I think it's going to be different. I don't know how it's going to. What it's going to. The online thing isn't going to go away. The blogs aren't going to go away. The right wing press isn't going to go away, and the left wing press isn't going to go away. But what might come back is a kind of curating of the news. That everybody can say, oh yeah, okay, all right, the stock market did this today, or this crazy memo did this, or this wonderful memo did this, but what is in the memo? What was the motivation for, I want to know the facts, before I decide it's a crazy memo, before I decide it's a wonderful memo, before I decide the FBI should be thrown, before I decide the FBI is this, that, and the other. Whatever it is, I want a place to go and find some facts, please. And there's an increasing thing, and the Gallup has done some polling on this, that that people are saying, oh, tell me what happened first. So anyhow, I'm very hopeful. I'm not predicting anything, I'm just hopeful.
Well, Jim's hope is a big reason why we're doing what we do. Just so you have a sense of how this plays out here, not just here in this building, but here in this room. As you all know, American Forum has just a few episodes left that it'll tape, but we'll be doing our regular weekly events here. What you're going to see is a lot more of our scholars presenting their own research, our scholars bringing in this extraordinary network of other scholars that they work with, as Mel and Will have been talking about their work on presidents going to war. They have some of the great diplomatic and military historians in the country, and here at many of them here at the university. You'll see them. You'll see big conferences here. We do 2 or 3 conferences a semester. So later on this spring, we'll be doing a conference that Mel has organized called America First, looking back in history at the concept of America First and what we think of as often associated with it, isolationism, and how much of it echoes forward today or is being repeated. In the fall, we're looking at 3 major gatherings. We're going to do one around the 10th anniversary of the financial crisis that Bob Bruner is taking the lead on. Guillen McKee, who Barbara mentioned before, is doing convening on health policy and healthcare and history and current. And then thanks to Lee Middleditch, we're working with Montpelier on a gathering just after the midterm elections looking at President's Congress and polarization that we're really quite excited about. So some big conferences as well as our weekly events, and we hope you'll be there with us. I want to thank Jim and Barbara. Jim, first of all, for being the player coach that he is, but also for being a member of our governing council. There are a number of our other governing council members here. I can see a few of them, but with the lights, I'm scared that I'll forget someone who's there. But if you don't know who they are, I hope they actually raise your hand if you're a governing council member. I see Jim and Elsie. There's Claire, and there may be some out in the room in the back. These are our terrific leaders and guides here at the center. And then Barbara, for being Barbara, but also being part of our scholar team. As I said, it's a terrific team. Our full-time faculty here, the faculty that we share with the university. In the video, you saw a number of them, including our senior fellows, who are former White House practitioners from both parties. We're a little like Noah's Ark. We bring them in 2 at a time, 1 R, 1 D. And they're a great group of people that really enjoy being with one another and with us. And then finally, our professional staff, the development, communications, and administrative people that make this place keep the lights on and keep the place going every day. And so I want to finish by thanking them because they put all the hard work into making this event happen. So with that, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you on the Crossroads.